I, the founder of Chapin's Inferno, a wandering cauldron of politically incorrect commentary, am pleased to report that our friends at Encounter Press have released a new book, What's Wrong with Benevolence, Happiness, Private Property, and the Limits of Enlightenment. It is an essay by the late and very great David Stove, philosopher and one of the first grand enemies of political correctness. His theme can be summed up in these pages as follows. The whole of economic history since 1789 testifies that the more extravagantly you indulge your benevolence, the more extravagant still will your next indulgence of it need to be. Benevolence is the heroine of the enlightened. As another author mentioned last year, when you ask the leftist what more needs to be done in terms of government programming, the answer is always the same. More, more, more. Nothing that we ever do is ever enough. According to Wikipedia link, early on in his undergraduate career, Stove was part of a political bohemian set at Sydney University, some of whom later became part of the Sydney Push. Stove flirted with Marxism at this stage, but on his own admission abandoned it when he discovered what real intellectual work was. He eventually became a political conservative and was later to clash with some of his former comrades. "Oh, he's our kind of guy and a hero of mine," Roger Kimball noted in the preface. Imagine ridiculing feminism and affirmative action in an environment in which their espousal is the only sure litmus test for political correctness, concluding that feminism is a disease of the rich. It is born of idleness, hence of leisure, hence of money. Imagine investigating the contemporary welfare state and identifying benevolence as its besetting and unsustainable liability. This paladin of truth died in 1994, and he took his own life after battling esophageal cancer for a year. And this book reflects his deep pessimism as he argues that in the face of a state that slowly but surely eradicates the civil society, the only sane thing to do is accept death in the manner of an Indian who is fishing upstream from Niagara Falls, who suddenly discovers that despite his massive efforts, he is headed for certain destruction. He advises readers to follow the Indian's lead and sit upright in your canoe. Fold your arms over your chest and welcome your own demise. Obviously, Chapin here, I don't agree with him, and I don't see it that way. Even if he's right, I'd rather die on my feet fighting than in a frozen pose of submission. This work is a response and a partial defense of Thomas Malthus, who penned Essay on the Principle of Population as it Affects the Future Improvement of Society, which appeared in 1798. If you haven't heard of Malthus, Google his name with world population included and see what you find. Now, not off topic at all, I want to mention that I got an email today from a college student, and she asks, do you believe that liberals are concerned about global warming simply because they're benevolent? Ah! What a ridiculous premise. Imagine what my answer will be. If I had 5 years, I couldn't finish answering. No, leftists, again, not liberals, but leftists. Liberals are people like Stove, Kimball, and me. We're classical liberals. But the left brims with totalitarian personalities, and they are motivated by an omnipresent desire for power and control. Miss, they don't give a darn about anything else, period. You're being indoctrinated, and you don't appear to even realize it. As Stove would respond regarding the self-righteous leftists that he has known, it was often observed that such people had something very parched and cold about them. The future happiness of the workers was the only subject at all capable of warming them into any enthusiasm. The actual feelings they had towards actual workers, especially if the latter showed any signs of present happiness, were generally not benevolent at all, but rather, to speak plainly, murderous. Enlightened benevolence is unreal and has no attraction except for a few cold-blooded people who exist on the margins of normal life, and that it rules our world. Stove argues here that those who proclaim benevolence as a motivator for policy changes invariably cause more problems than they solve. Conservatives have a term for this phenomenon, and we call it the law of unintended consequences. Now, this law is something that statists don't recognize at all. Their actions are meant to say, "Oh, look at me, I've crafted a law to save the poor." Then tell me, leftist, why 40 years later there are twice as many poor as there were before your ideas got codified? Why is that the case, leftist? But they're never going to answer that because they don't care about the poor in the least. The only people they care about are themselves and their need to pat themselves on the backs for their good intentions. Prima donnas, if you don't analyze the results of what you do, then you never had any good intentions with which to begin. A quote from William Rathbone Gregg that precedes the first chapter describes the conservative's relationship with the utopian. In this world, a large part of the business of the wise is to counteract the efforts of the good. Roger Kimball again from the preface. The modern welfare state is one result of the triumph of abstract benevolence. Its chief effects are to institutionalize dependence on the state, while also assuring the steady growth of the bureaucracy charged with managing government largesse. Stove was a clever, witty man, and I really liked the accuracy of his describing Lenin as one of the first post-people persons. Absolutely the case. The author assaults the concept of modern happiness itself here. He notes that parents say as long as their offspring are happy, that's all they could wish for. But he argues, if one's baby boy turns out to be an idiot, who is always extremely happy, would you say then that happiness is all that matters to you about his life? How about if your daughter is a co-joined twin? What then? And it's examining all this stuff, that all these cliches that we just take as being facts, that I found really helpful in this book. He implodes them all. Now, there's a lot here to think about. Stove had many, many foes, and he bettered all of them. So check out this book or any of his others if you can, and I'll see you this weekend for more from Chapin's Inferno.